that the house would be visible from the highway. The number formed almost unconsciously in his mind. 50,000. It was audacious. Impossible, some might say. But it felt right. Over the next few days, as he began to sketch out his vision and quietly purchase supplies, he kept the project hidden from prying eyes. Trips to hardware stores, bulk orders online, hushed conversations with electricians who thought he was joking. Every delivery that arrived at his home was quickly carried inside, stacked in the garage until it was bursting with boxes. The weight of what he was doing wasn't lost on him. He knew the HOA would notice. He knew they would come after him with letters, fines, maybe even legal threats. But that was the point. For once, he wasn't just decorating a house for the holidays. He was sending a message to the HOA, to his neighbors, to anyone who had ever felt bullied into silence. The house would shine not just as a display of lights, but as a symbol of defiance. By the time the first frost clung to the grass, the plan was ready. He stood in the driveway one cold morning, surveying the house as the sun rose, knowing it would soon look nothing like it did now. The quiet, conformist facade would be erased in favor of a dazzling explosion of color and light. He could almost hear the gasps of neighbors, the angry sputtering of the HOA board members, the buzz of curiosity spreading through town. Christmas was coming, and this year, it would not be silent. The first strand of lights clicked into place along the roofline, a simple beginning to something extraordinary. With each staple, each bulb, each glowing ornament, the rebellion grew stronger. Soon, there would be no going back. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the house sat in darkness, waiting for the moment when the world would see what he had done. The war on holiday cheer had begun. The transformation began slowly, almost quietly, as though the house itself was reluctant to reveal the rebellion brewing within its walls. For the first few days, only the faint clatter of ladders and the soft click of staple guns echoed across the driveway. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a homeowner doing ordinary maintenance. But hidden beneath the mundane sounds was a meticulous plan unfolding. Every box hauled from the garage carried promise. Inside were coils of vibrant lights, red, green, blue, gold, each string destined to be part of something extraordinary. Wreaths, figurines, mechanical reindeer, and glowing candy canes were stacked like soldiers waiting for orders. It was a collection so vast that neighbors began to whisper, curiosity piqued by the constant stream of packages. At first, no one dared ask questions. The neighborhood was bound tightly by unspoken rules, one of which was, never draw too much attention. But here, attention was being invited, constructed piece by piece, bulb by bulb. As the first strand of lights stretched across the roofline, the rebellion became visible. A modest row of white bulbs twinkled faintly against the siding, innocent enough to be overlooked. But the homeowner knew this was just the beginning. That single strand was a fuse waiting to be lit, a teaser for something that would soon set the entire street ablaze with color. Each night, after work, more lights were added. The roof was lined, then the gutters, then the windows. Bushes transformed into glowing spheres, while the bare trees in the yard became skeletal towers of light. The garage door gleamed with synchronized patterns, and the walkway to the porch lit up like a runway. Every corner of the property was claimed. The number of lights climbed steadily, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. Power strips multiplied. Extension cords snaked through the yard-like veins, converging into a humming network that seemed alive with energy. Neighbors began to notice the difference. Cars slowed as they drove past. Curtains twitched. Phones clicked discreet photos. And then, whispers turned to questions. Why so many lights? Wasn't the HOA's letter clear? Wouldn't this lead to trouble? Some were amused, some impressed, but others grew nervous. In a neighborhood ruled by fear of the board, one resident's defiance felt dangerous to them all. The HOA, of course, noticed almost immediately. A polite but firm letter arrived first, slipped into the mailbox with the same official crest as the original ban. It reminded the homeowner of the no exterior decoration rule and warned of escalating fines. But the letter was ignored, tucked away in a drawer beneath a pile of receipts. Another week passed. The house was no longer modestly twinkling. It was glowing, radiant against the darkness. At night, children stopped on sidewalks to marvel at it, their faces illuminated by colors that danced across their cheeks. Families who had once accepted the neighborhood's dull conformity began parking their cars along the curb just to take a better look. For them, it wasn't just lights. It was hope, mischief, and joy wrapped in one. The HOA responded with more force. A second notice arrived, this one printed in bold red ink, warning of immediate fines and possible legal action. The tone was sharp, its intent clear. Compliance through fear. But fear no longer had a place in this house. Each warning letter was treated as fuel, another reason to keep building higher, brighter, bolder. By now, nearly 40,000 lights had been installed. The garage hummed like a command center, filled with tangled cords, spare bulbs, and timers set with military precision. The house was no longer simply decorated. It was a spectacle in progress. One cold evening, the moment finally arrived. With every strand connected, every ornament in place, and the 50,000 baht, the light secured to the roof, the switch was flipped. In an instant, the house erupted into brilliance. The glow was blinding, a flood of color that surged across the street and spilled into the night sky. Roof lines pulsed with synchronized waves of red and green. Trees glittered with shimmering cascades of gold. Candy canes towered like glowing sentinels, while Santa's sleigh soared in neon glory above the garage. The entire property became a canvas of dazzling light, each bulb a defiant brushstroke against the HOA's gray uniformity. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors emerged from their homes, shielding their eyes, laughing in disbelief, gasping in wonder. Children clapped their hands and danced in the driveway. Teenagers filmed the display, already imagining the likes and shares their videos would earn online. Cars that once slowed to peak now stopped altogether, clogging the narrow street as families rolled down windows to marvel at the sight. And somewhere in the polished meeting room of the HOA, board members fumed. Their authority had been mocked in the most public way possible. Not only had their rule been broken, it had been obliterated under 50,000 glowing bulbs. But for the homeowner, standing in the yard with frost biting his fingers, none of that mattered. All he saw was the glow. All he felt was the joy, the defiance, the triumphant rush of proving that one person's spirit could shine brighter than 1,000 rules. The HOA's war had escalated, and the opening battle had been won. Yet beneath the laughter of children and the wonder of passing strangers, a storm was brewing. The HOA was not finished. The board's next move would not be polite letters or idle warnings. It would be harsher, colder, more ruthless. And the house of 50,000 lights, brilliant as it was, stood at the center of it all. The morning after the grand unveiling, the neighborhood awoke not just to the glow of 50,000 lights still shimmering faintly against the frost, but to the first signs of retaliation. As dawn broke, a crisp envelope appeared on the homeowner's door, taped firmly so that no wind could tear it away. The HOA's crest, bold and smug, stared out like a warning shot. Inside, the message was direct: a fine of $100 for each day of non-compliance. The tone was sterile, mechanical, but its intent was venomous. To the HOA, money was power, and they wielded it like a weapon. Most residents faced with such punishment would have yielded. The thought of thousands of dollars drained from their savings would have been enough to smother any act of defiance. But this house, blazing like a beacon in the middle of a muted community, did not dim. The lights stayed on, and the fines began to pile up. Day after day, new envelopes arrived. The fines doubled, then tripled, each letter colder than the last. Threats of legal action soon followed, mentions of liens, court orders, and even the possibility of foreclosure. The HOA, accustomed to easy victories, expected their target to fold quickly. Instead, the defiance only grew stronger. For every warning letter tucked into the mailbox, the lights glowed brighter. For every fine delivered, another decoration was added to the yard. A giant inflatable snow globe appeared near the driveway, its swirling flakes visible from blocks away. A choir of animatronic carolers joined the scene, their voices mechanical but their presence undeniable. The display had become more than just an act of holiday cheer. It had become a stage for resistance, and people noticed. The street, once empty after sunset, became a destination. Cars lined the curbs, headlights cutting through the frost as families spilled out to take photos. Children pressed mittened hands against the glowing candy canes, their laughter piercing the cold. Teenagers leaned against their cars, phones raised high, capturing the spectacle for social media. Word spread quickly. What began as a neighborhood curios, it became a town-wide phenomenon. Local news stations caught wind of the story, their cameras capturing the glittering house while reporters spoke breathlessly of the man who defied the HOA. The footage aired on evening broadcasts, sparking debates in living rooms across the city. Some saw him as a hero, a symbol of freedom against oppressive rules. Others shook their heads, warning that rebellion always comes with consequences. But the most powerful effect was on the neighbors themselves. For years they had lived under the thumb of the HOA, their individuality squeezed out, their voices muted. The glowing house reminded them of what had been stolen, the right to joy, to expression, to simple humanity. Many began to show quiet support. Some slipped encouraging notes under the homeowner's door. Others dropped off baked goods or cups of hot cocoa, small tokens of solidarity in the Cold War unfolding on their street. The HOA, however, saw none of this as harmless. To them, the house wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was a threat to their authority. If one homeowner could defy them so openly, what was to stop others from following? Their control, carefully crafted and fiercely guarded, was unraveling. So they escalated. A formal notice arrived by certified mail, delivered by a courier whose uneasy expression betrayed his knowledge of the drama. The letter was longer this time, filled with pages of legal jargon and threats. It cited clauses buried deep in the HOA's bylaws, rules so obscure that most residents had never even heard of them. According to the board, the lights constituted a public nuisance, a violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards, and even a safety hazard. But while the HOA wrapped their words in law, the people saw only one thing: a house glowing with joy against the gray monotony of control. And the brighter the house shone, the darker the HOA's anger grew. By mid-December, the street had transformed entirely. What once was a sleepy row of identical houses now pulsed with life every evening. Food trucks began parking nearby, serving hot chocolate and roasted chestnuts to the crowds. Local musicians performed carols on the sidewalks, their voices mingling with the mechanical choir in the yard. Businesses downtown hung posters advertising the House of 50,000 Lights, turning the rebellion into a tourist attraction. The HOA held emergency meetings, their voices raised in frustration. They spoke of lawsuits, injunctions, and police enforcement. They drafted letters, called attorneys, and discussed strategies late into the night. But outside their polished meeting rooms, the tide was shifting. What had begun as a battle over one man's Christmas lights had grown into a movement, and movements were not so easily extinguished. The homeowner, though, felt the weight of it all. Behind the glowing facade, stacks of unopened envelopes lay on the kitchen counter, each one a reminder of the war's cost. The numbers were climbing fast, thousands of dollars in fines, legal threats mounting like storm clouds. It was a risk that could not be ignored forever. But as he stepped outside each night and saw the faces of strangers lit with wonder, as he heard the laughter of children and the carols sung in defiance of silence, he knew he could not turn back. The lights were no longer just his. They belonged to everyone who had ever felt crushed by rules that stole joy. The HOA wanted darkness, but he had given them a star. And now, as Christmas drew nearer, both sides prepared for the next move. The homeowner tightened his display, ensuring every bulb shone brightly. The HOA sharpened its tactics, determined to break the rebellion before it spread further. The war of lights was no longer a neighborhood quarrel. It had become a battle of wills, and neither side intended to surrender. By mid-December, the neighborhood no longer resembled the sterile suburb the HOA had carefully curated for years. Instead, the street had transformed into a festival ground, pulsing with life under the blaze of 50,000 Christmas lights. The air was thick with the scent of roasted nuts from food trucks, the sound of carols sung by bundled-up choirs, and the laughter of children darting between glowing candy canes. But inside the HOA's boardroom, the mood was anything but festive. The board members sat around a polished oak table, their faces tight with frustration. Each newscast, each social media post, each photo of crowds gathering outside the glowing house was another blow to their authority. They had sent fines, warnings, and threats, but nothing had worked. Instead of yielding, the rebellion had grown louder, brighter, and more infectious. This was no longer about decorations, it was about control, and the board was determined to reclaim it. The next escalation came swiftly. A thick packet arrived at the homeowner's door, delivered by a courier who muttered a sympathetic "good luck" before retreating. Inside were dozens of pages of legal documents, an official cease and desist order. The language was heavy with accusations: violation of community standards, failure to comply with bylaws, willful endangerment of property values, creation of a public nuisance. The board demanded immediate removal of all lights and decorations, threatening to drag the matter into court if ignored. It was a bold move, one designed to intimidate with sheer weight of paper and jargon. But intimidation had long since lost its grip. The homeowner read every page carefully, then placed the packet neatly on the kitchen table. He didn't crumble it in anger or toss it in the trash. Instead, he smiled faintly, because behind the wall of threats, he saw cracks. The HOA was scrambling. Their fury had turned desperate, and desperation was weakness. And he had a plan. The following week, as the HOA stewed in its fury, the rebellion grew more organized. Support from the community, once quiet and hesitant, became bold and public. Neighbors who had once feared the board now openly decorated their own homes, inspired by the glowing house. A modest string of lights appeared across one yard, then another. Soon, entire blocks shimmered with color, a spreading wave of defiance the HOA could no longer contain. Local businesses joined in. A hardware store donated supplies, proudly advertising that its lights were now part of the infamous display. A law firm, amused by the HOA's blustering legal threats, offered free counsel to the homeowner, pointing out how many of the board's claims wouldn't hold up in court. Even city officials, wary of being seen on the wrong side of public opinion, quietly hinted that they had no interest in interfering with the spectacle. Every ally gained was another layer of protection. What had started as one man's battle had become a community movement, and the HOA found itself increasingly isolated. Still, they pushed harder. Inspectors were sent into the neighborhood citing obscure violations, improper trash can placement, lawns that didn't meet uniform aesthetic guidelines, driveways with faint cracks. Residents whispered angrily, recognizing the crackdown for what it was: retaliation. The board wanted to scare everyone back into silence. But instead of silence, they got unity. Neighbors banded together, filing appeals, sharing resources, and documenting every petty citation. What once had been a community fractured by fear was now unified by frustration. The HOA had drawn its battle lines, but in doing so, it had awakened something stronger than compliance: resistance. And at the center of it all stood the house of 50,000 lights, glowing brighter than ever. The media loved the story. National outlets picked it up, dubbing it the War on Christmas Lights. Reporters from out of state flocked to the Nage, HBORhood, interviewing bundled-up children, cheerful visitors, and indignant HOA board members who struggled to defend their actions. Every time a spokesperson for the HOA appeared on camera, their stiff explanations only fueled more outrage. Meanwhile, the homeowner's calm demeanor and dazzling display made him an unlikely hero. But even as support swelled, the battle carried a heavy toll. Fines continued to arrive, their total now climbing into the tens of thousands. Court dates loomed. And though lawyers were confident that much of the HOA's case was shaky at best, the stress weighed heavily on the man who had started it all. Each evening, as he flipped the switch and watched the house explode into brilliance, he wondered how much longer he could carry the burden. Still, when he stepped outside and saw the joy in the faces of children, the laughter of neighbors who had rediscovered their voices, and the wonder of strangers who drove hours to witness the glow, he knew he couldn't quit. The lights were more than bulbs and wires. They were a symbol. And symbols cannot be extinguished by paperwork. As Christmas drew near, tension reached its peak. The HOA scheduled an emergency court hearing, determined to force a judge to order the removal of the lights before the holiday. Their argument was simple. The display violated the bylaws, disrupted the neighborhood, and posed a risk to property values. But on the night before the hearing, something remarkable happened. The entire neighborhood, once silent and submissive, erupted into light. One by one, houses flipped their switches. Roof lines sparkled, trees twinkled, lawns glowed with inflatables and ornaments. The street became a river of color, a united front against the HOA's darkness. For the first time, the homeowner's house was not alone. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer a battle between one man and a bee board. It was a battle between joy and control, freedom and fear. And the tide was turning. The courthouse stood tall and unyielding, its stone steps slick with frost as reporters and curious onlookers gathered in the early morning chill. The case had drawn more attention than anyone could have predicted. Cameras clicked, microphones jostled, and whispers filled the air. The battle of the Christmas lights had arrived at its climax. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with tension. On one side sat the HOA board, their polished suits and stern expressions carefully arranged to project authority. Stacks of binders and documents were piled high before them, a fortress of paper meant to intimidate. They spoke quietly among themselves, lips pursed, eyes darting toward the gallery packed with spectators. On the other side sat the homeowner, calm but resolute, flanked by his volunteer attorneys. They carried only a slim folder of documents, but their greatest weapon wasn't in writing. It was outside, glowing every night for all to see. The courtroom was filled with neighbors, supporters, and even strangers who had traveled from other towns just to witness the hearing. Their presence was a silent vote of confidence, a collective declaration that this was more than a legal dispute. The judge, a weary figure in a dark robe, called the court to order. The HOA's attorney rose first, launching into a carefully rehearsed speech. Their arguments were precise, laced with citations from the bylaws. The display was a nuisance, a violation of community rules, a danger to safety, and a threat to property values. They spoke of light pollution, traffic congestion, and loss of neighborhood cohesion. Their tone was sharp, their words cold, their intent unmistakable: crush the rebellion through sheer legal force. When the HOA's attorney finally sat down, the air was heavy with their certainty. To them, this was an inevitable victory. After all, rules were rules, and the board existed to enforce them. But then the defense stood. The homeowner's attorney didn't begin with bylaws or technicalities. Instead, they spoke of community, of joy, of the purpose of traditions that brought people together. They painted a picture not of violations, but of children laughing in front yards, families gathered in wonder, neighbors rediscovering their voices after years of silence. They reminded the court that the HOA's job was to protect the value of the community, not crush its spirit. The gallery nodded, murmuring their agreement. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. Evidence was presented. Photos of the crowds, letters from neighbors in support, testimonies from business owners who had seen an influx of customers thanks to the display. Even local officials had submitted statements praising the lights as a beacon of cheer in a difficult year. The defense pointed out inconsistencies in the HOA's claims, highlighting how many of their cited rules were vague, selectively enforced, or irrelevant. The HOA grew restless. Their carefully constructed wall of authority was crumbling. For years, they had relied on fear, on the assumption that no one would ever dare to challenge them. But here, in the courtroom, their power was unraveling in the face of something they couldn't control: unity. At last, the judge spoke. His words were measured, deliberate. He acknowledged the HOA's right to enforce rules, but noted the importance of reason and fairness in doing so. He questioned whether prohibiting all holiday decorations was ever the intent of the bylaws, and whether such enforcement truly served the best interests of the community. He noted the overwhelming public support for the display, the absence of tangible harm, and the glaring overreach in the board's actions. And then came the ruling. The cease and desist order was denied. The homeowner was permitted to keep the lights shining through the holiday season. The HOA's fines were placed under review, their legality questioned, and the judge set up cameras, capturing the scene for the evening news. Helicopters hovered above, their spotlights sweeping across the glowing homes. The story had spread far beyond the town. Now, it was being shared nationwide, a symbol of defiance and joy. The homeowner watched from his driveway, humbled by the sight. He had begun this as a solitary act, a spark of rebellion against rules that had gone too far. But what it had become was something much larger. His house was no longer just a beacon of light. It was a rallying point, a reminder that joy cannot be regulated, that community cannot be controlled, and that sometimes one act of courage is enough to inspire many. As the clock neared midnight, the crowd quieted. A hush fell over the street, broken only by the soft crunch of snow beneath boots. Then, as if on cue, the lights shifted into their final display. Music swelled from hidden speakers, a triumphant orchestral score that filled the air. The house erupted into a dazzling choreography of color, waves of red and green sweeping across the roof, golden spirals cascading down the trees, Santa's sleigh glowing brighter as if taking flight. The crowd gasped, then cheered, voices rising together in awe and delight. For a moment the world felt suspended, caught between the cold night and the warmth of shared joy. And in that moment, the war was over. The HOA, once feared, now seemed laughably small in comparison to the sea of glowing homes and cheering neighbors. Their rules had been broken, their power stripped away not by anger, but by light. In the days that followed, the story continued to spread. News anchors marveled at the spectacle. Social media buzzed with videos and photos. Messages poured in from people across the country, praising the homeowner's courage and sharing their own stories of standing up against overreach. What had begun as a neighborhood squabble had become a legend. But legends do not end when the lights go out. When January came and the decorations were packed away, the neighborhood remained changed. The houses no longer felt like lifeless clones. The people no longer whispered in fear of citations and fines. Instead, they talked, laughed, and gathered. The rebellion had reminded them that community was about connection, not conformity. The HOA still existed, but its grip was loosened forever. The board no longer dictated with unchecked authority. It answered to the people it once sought to control. As for the homeowner, he never forgot what had happened that winter. The fines, the threats, the courtroom battles, all of it had been heavy to bear. But when he looked back, he didn't remember the stress. He remembered the glow, the laughter of children, the songs that filled the street, the way 50,000 lights had turned darkness into brilliance, and every December afterward, when he opened the boxes of tangled cords and glowing bulbs, he smiled. The HOA might have once said no to Christmas lights, but he had proved that joy cannot be banned. The House of Lights became a tradition, then a legacy. Each year, more families joined in, until the once dull neighborhood was known across the state for its holiday displays. People traveled from miles away to see the spectacle, to feel the warmth of a community that had once been smothered but now shone brightly. And so the story lived on. A story of one house, 50,000 lights, and the spirit of defiance that turned a battle into a beacon. Because sometimes, the brightest light comes not from decorations, but from the courage to let joy shine, no matter who tries to turn it off.